Hi, and welcome back to another episode of ManaTutor MTG Draft. Today, we're going to be going over our first feelings of Lost Caverns of Ixalan draft with the very first opening week today. It just released on a Tuesday on Arena, and so we've had the week to play through a bit of that. Also, I want to note we're going to be dealing with maybe some technical things here and there. We are recording on a new platform, StreamYard, to give that a try out.
This is not sponsored, by the way. For others watching, this is not sponsored, but we'll gladly take it.
We've talked a little bit about the set here and there offline, not too deeply, so we'll go more deep into it here. But I do want to call out your win rate is pretty sky high so far here.
Low sample size, though. So
True. But for those who aren't as familiar with the show, we started this with the Lord of the Rings set back in, what was that, June? And that was really when Matt started playing draft more competitively. I mean, we've been playing Magic since middle school.
A long time. But that was that was really my first introduction to arena drafting. I drafted in paper a number of times a long time ago, but that was really the first time I really started doing ranked drafting, right?
And you were at with the Lord of the Rings, I think, on the low 50% win rate.
Right? Low 50s, not anything great. But I don't know. That set frustrated me a lot, but we'll see. Yeah.
But now with this set, so far at least, you are, well, I had down 20 and 11, so 20 wins to 11 losses, which is a 64.5% win rate. And this isn't best of one, by the way, for everybody. So that's a really high win rate. Yeah, for Premier Draft best of one. So I've been very close there as well. I'm at 33 and 18 at a 64.7% win rate. So I was going to say I edged you out by 0.2% so far. However, I played
one more game today,
and you played a game and won it. So
I played one more game. I did one more draft, and I'm 1-0 so far. So, I'm probably at like 65 point something or something like that now. But that will not stay, right? Like that. Like as soon as I get into platinum and stuff, that's gonna just like drop off like a rock. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think so far from what you said, you got a decent. From what I understand of the set, a good grasp of it, and so we'll get into more of the details here. And for those that don't know how to judge the win rates, the average win rate on 17 lands is above average, right? So 50% is clearly the average win rate by definition, but in 17 lands there is selection bias. The better players tend to have 17 lands downloaded. It's at about 56%, I think. The average was actually 56.4 the last time I checked. But anything typically above 60% is what puts a player into the top performing players bucket on 17 lands. So 65% win rate is way up there. And yes,
it will not stay that way.
But
I will revert to the mean very quickly.
Well, what are your opening thoughts of the format? How has this week been? What do you feel about it? Any notable things stick out?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I know we're going to talk a lot about like colors and relative power of colors. I think it's really interesting because this set I think is going to take a while for everyone, including myself, to figure out. When we start talking about the colors and the various color win rates, we'll obviously talk about, where black is at and how that's, it's much lower than you would typically expect for black. But I think a lot of that is just because people have not really figured out Descend and how to build a deck around it to, I'm actually playing my first, the draft I just started is black-red, and I've got a fair amount of Descend in it. And I'm trying to dip my toes in that and figure out, how to make that work, because I think it requires a different way of thinking about it. Normally you don't want a creature that's like every time it attacks it mills a card, but now like you're thinking, well, if that happens, 3 other things on my board pop off, so that's great. Like I'm willing to sacrifice a card to get a treasure token and put a counter on something, and like gain a life or something like that. Like there's You know, it requires a new way of thinking that I'm not quite sure we've had before. I mean, we've had things with like flashback and you know, where you want to get a certain card in graveyard because it's cheaper to flash it back than it is to play it normally, or things like that. But it, not to this extent where you just need like. I mean, we've had some similar mechanics, but I think this one is really like on steroids to the point where it's like you want to be doing it every turn, right? And you want to be doing it reliably. So that's one mechanic that I think is interesting. Same with craft. I think we're still kind of figuring that out. And how does that fit into your mana curve, right? Like, how do you plan for, something you play on turn 2 and then craft with on turn 5 or something like that. And so that's kind of a new thing. So yeah, that's kind of my initial thoughts is like, it's interesting because I think there's going to be a lot of, and I think I said this in our initial preview, I think the meta of this is going to evolve a lot throughout the life of the set, because I think people are going to be constantly figuring out new synergies and how to really use their cards. An example of this is, I was playing a game, actually the one I went 1-0 on, I ended up winning this, but I was playing against a black-white deck. And the player had Bartolome del Presidio, the one where you sacrifice a creature, it gets a counter, it's a 2/1 for 2. But he also had, I think it's a white common, Envoy of Okanek something, I think. The one that you pay 5 and you get to create a 1/1, right? A 1/1 like artifact. And he was just basically creating that and sacrificing it every turn, and every turn his Bartolome was getting powered up, right? We were at a kind of a stalled board state, right? So that kind of didn't necessarily work for him because I had a Death Toucher on the board, things like that. But the point is, right, there's a lot of really good synergies in this set that people are going to continue to figure out. And like, I was shocked by that. I was like, wow, he's going to like destroy me. I ended up winning the game for various reasons, but anyways, that's kind of my initial thoughts, and that's a little bit of a ramble, but yeah, Envoy of Okanek Cacao, yeah, that one.
Bear with me while I get used to how to present and everything through this platform. But this set is interesting. In I do think it'll take people a while to figure out all the different like micro synergies within each color, right?
Yeah.
There are some different weird ones, like so Discover is fairly straightforward and it's just powerful. So I think that that's a good one to go towards. The ones that are a little bit weird are like the tapping artifacts one is a little bit weird because it's a lot of times like tap 2 and then I don't know, they're tapping your own things to create synergies outside of them tapping themselves is slightly newer. Like I don't really recall the last time we saw that mechanic. Then
how to do it too, because most of those only happen as a sorcery, right? So like it's not like you can just end of your opponent's turn tap 5 things and get something. You have to decide to do it on your turn, which leaves you without blockers, and right. So there's a lot of things that are like not just the mechanics, but the timing of when to use them and how to use them. Like Descend, right? Descend, most of the Descend things say if you at the end of your end step, if you descended this turn. So there's no point in doing it on your opponent's step. So you have to make a conscious decision to lose a permanent on your turn somehow. So I think there's a lot of things that are a little bit different than most players would normally think about how they want to use them.
Yeah, and I think that changes the strength of different cards too. Like everyone's doing things on their own turn rather than worrying about like on your turn what your opponent might do during your turn. And as such, things like the aura enchantments and things like that can sometimes get blown out, right? If I were to target something with the aura, like the 1 red mana, 2 colorless, +1/+1 and trample, discover 3. What is it? Tali's Favor.
Tali's Favor, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, this card. I think like some people rated this low. We actually were pretty high on this going into the set, and I think it is playing out pretty well. Like I like this card quite a bit.
Oh yeah, I mean it's effectively free. Like I mean, you don't know what you're going to get with the Discover, but like you might get a 1-coster, and then then it's not free. But You know, I really like the card. I think it's great. The trample, especially. For me, the trample is really what makes it a good card.
100% agree. Trample is huge in the set. It's because there's also a lot of strategies that want to get a lot of small things on the board, and then there's big dinos too. And the problem with dinos would be if they didn't have trample, you can just chump block with all your little small things and keep the game going into your favor. But when they have trample, you can't do that. So trample is big in the set.
Yeah, or you get something like an adaptive gem guard, right? Which is in white, and it's an artifact creature, and then that's one of those ones, right? Tap 2 artifacts, put a +1/+1 counter on it, right? It doesn't have trample though. Like, I've played several games against these, and for the easiest way to beat them is just to have a few small creatures out that you can afford to get rid of, and then or have a 1/1 Death Toucher or something like that on the board, and it's like, well, that thing's now useless to your opponent. But you give it, like, if you play white-red and you give that a Tali's Favor, it's not so useless anymore. Your opponent has to deal with it, or lose the game basically over time. So yeah, I think that card plays really well. Although, you know, I don't know that everybody's at the same position on it. I happen to like it a lot, though.
Yeah, I like this card quite a bit. Oh, you mean wait?
No, I'm talking about a Tali's Favor. I'm talking about a Tali's Favor. But yes, I like Adaptive Gem Guard too. I haven't actually played much white, but
yeah, I actually I don't think I've put this onto the battlefield myself, but I think I put it into a deck before. I've definitely drafted it with the intention of trying to play it, but I think pivoted out of white. But I played against it to the point where if you haven't played against this or played with it, this can get huge. Like, I think I was against a 22/22 creature at one point with this, but you're right, it didn't bother me because I was able to get chump blockers down, and I basically could get around this thing. And eventually I ended up just it did get out of reach for me, except I had a braid. So I could just destroy
right. Also a braid.
But yeah, if they would have killed me long before I could deal with it if it had trample. They had no way to give it trample.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's a big thing. Going back to the idea of playing things on your turn, right? Like, thinking about things like Fanatical Offering, right? Fanatical Offering is a card that just begs to be played on your opponent's end step, right? You want to play that, you know, or block chump blocking with something, and then, you know, sacrificing it and still not taking damage, right? But because of the descend mechanic, and you want to descend on your turn, there is now a lot of incentive to play this at sorcery speed, in order to, you know, sacrifice the creature and get the additional benefits of doing it. Not that, you know, drawing 2 cards and creating a map token is a pretty big benefit for 2 mana and some cheap creature you don't care about, but like, it gets much better if you also create a treasure token and do like, you know, a whole bunch of other stuff. So I think that's a thing that, you know, is really an adjustment, because I would normally say, well, yeah, I'm going to play this on my opponent's end step. I'm not going to do it on my turn. I'll use my mana for something else. But anyways, yeah. So it's an adjustment. I think this set's going to be an interesting adjustment.
Yeah, speaking of Fanatical Offering, I'm a little bit nervous about our bet. So you had Fanatical Offering, I have Deadweight, and whichever card is higher.
Oh, I'm sure Deadweight's higher. I mean, we can look at 17 lands.
Not last I checked, it wasn't.
Oh, really? Oh man, I'm surprised.
You picked it.
I'm surprised.
You just went with the bet because
I always go for the hot take though. So
okay. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, no, so it was the highest performing. What am I doing here? Because that's Dex. I don't know what I'm doing here.
Hard data. Yeah, I'm looking at
it. It's the second highest performing. Yeah. So Tithing Blade was number 1, followed by
really. I also like Tithing Blades. That's hilarious.
I mean, it's close. So Fanatical Offering 56.7 to 55.9. So by 0.8. I mean, 0.8's you know, a decent gap. So
I'm surprised Join the Dead's not the number 1. Like, Join the Dead's basically murder.
Yeah, but it's not. I guess with the
True.
Descend 4, it's pretty darn close, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, -5 kills 90% of the set. So, like, it's
Yeah,
basically murder.
that's not what the set's about, though. Like, it's like, yeah, Tithing Blade, you sacrifice a creature, you end up getting a craft later on, and it's an artifact to do things with in the meantime, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, no, I
Fanatical
like
Offering,
Tithing Blade. I was choosing between Tithing Blade and Fanatical Offering as my two cards that I thought were going to be the best black common for the bet. I kind of wish I'd taken Tithing because it's a little bit higher up.
yeah, well, I was gonna say I don't really think I'd take the bet against Tithing Blade. So
Sure, that's fair.
but you know, Fanatical Offering, I was even like, okay, it's a fair bet, I think, you know, to go with. And I still think Deadweight would win, but right now I'm definitely not, it's not looking that way.
Yeah,
So
I do think
still have time.
Fanatical. I don't know that Tithing Blade has upside. I think Fanatical Offering has upside, right? Because I think as more people figure out how to like really synergize it with Descend decks, it's going to go up in popularity. I've seen it go like 8th or 9th in a pack, and I'm just like, I can't believe that card's still in there. So, what are your opening thoughts?
Yeah, basically, I would agree with most of the things you said. I started off that piece of my thoughts on segment of the micro synergies within each
Yes.
color pair. I guess I want to say, like, I don't think that this set is made for splashing very often.
No.
It is one that's a little bit on rails with the color pairs. So in that aspect of know what your color pairs want to do strategy wise in terms of building your engine and playing that out is on rails, but you know, making sure you know all the intricacies of what's needed or what cards really work within each of those color pairs
Yes.
is interesting. And then yeah, like drafting to stay open so that you get into the color pair that gives you the most resources that you need, I think is a big piece. So I think the set favors good drafters quite well, and whereas other sets favored a bit more good gameplay. Not obviously every set.
Yeah.
Does
Oh, yeah.
both,
Yeah.
right?
No. Yeah. No. Yeah. Every set needs both, right? But yeah, I see where you're going. Yeah, and I do think I tend to agree, right? Because you think about it, and you think about most of the colors have, well, with the exception I'd say of black, have like two options that you can go for, depending on the color pairings that you choose with that, right?
Yeah.
Black is just descend all the time. There's really not much else to it, but like red has descend. Red also has artifact. And so you think about, okay, red black, you're probably doing descend. Red white, you're probably doing artifact. Red blue, you're probably doing artifact. Red green, though, is an interesting. Red green, you're doing dinos. So red also does dinos. That might be why red is the strongest color, because it does like it has like cards that do everything. But the cards you want are very different cards, to your point, right? Like if you're doing artifacts, you don't want dinos. If you're doing dinos, you don't want artifacts and you don't want descend. So you're kind of, you do have to really pick an archetype and go for it, right? And go for those, like you were saying, the synergies in that archetype. So yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Right. Like you even see that monocolor plus splash, like monocolor type decks, or even monocolor itself, I guess overall is better than your two color plus splash. Like, so yeah, two color and one color is really where you want to be. That's not to say you should never splash. And I think one of the after we go over our reviews of the colors and our greater garbage game that we want to play, of like reviewing certain cards that we want to basically mention if we think they're good or not. It would be nice to go through. I have a particular draft that I think does highlight staying open and then also looking
Picking
into
something.
possibly splashing. But
yeah, and to your point about monocolored, man, I came up. There are people just drafting some really mean mono reds, man. Like just tons and tons and tons of like 1 and 2 costers, and that's like the entire deck, and it just keeps, it pumps out You've got I forget the name of the goblin. That's a 1/2 that if you patrol an artifact, it's a 2/2 haster for 1. And just, absolutely going to town with like basically a mono red deck. Not something I expected to see. Definitely have played that against that. I'd love to try it once. It would be interesting, but I think because this set is a little bit slower, that deck is going to be a tough one. People might start, drafting those black cards that give all creatures -2/-2 and things like that, right? I forget the name of that. Something Eclipse, I think.
The black one that
Yeah. Cost 3 gives all creatures -2/-2. But like, man, that card is basically tailor made to deal with that, and I can see people starting to maybe pick that if and when that becomes more popular. Certainly in a best of 3 situation.
Yeah, that is. It's interesting too that for the most part, the best strategies have been, like we mentioned, proactive, right? Like you're building up your engine while your opponent's building up their engine. Whoever's engine can kind of kick off first and ramp them into a win is typically what works. But there is some control, and the most successful control looks to be blue-black.
Yeah, as one would expect.
Yeah, exactly. Black does seem more controlling across all the colors, in my opinion. I mean,
no, I think black is the control color here. Blue is kind of, but blue actually has a lot more creatures than you would normally expect in blue.
Yeah, and like blue-red is an aggro deck, right? Like the pirates stuff. Yeah. So, but yeah.
Although interestingly, I played a more control-y blue-red deck. Although it was not typical control. It was like, waylaying pirates, right? Which is not really a control card, but it is if you can, it's more of a tempo card. Mine was blue-red tempo more.
Yeah. That's
but,
pirates. Yeah. Yep.
So yeah. Anyways, that was the one that I trophied with a couple yesterday, I think. And it was an interesting combo because it wasn't super piratey. I didn't get Captain Storm. I did get Saheeli. Saheeli was fun. And when I got to play it, just making copies of creatures was tons of fun. But anyways, so it was kind of control-y, just not super control.
Captain Storm can get huge quick. I have.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I wish I'd gotten a Captain Storm in that deck. I just didn't. Never saw one.
Yeah, 2/2 that pumps whenever for +1/+1 counter every time an artifact enters the battlefield. Yeah, it goes quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So a little bit about the color strength. There are 2 ways to judge color strength. There is by win rate, and then there is by pick order, because sometimes what colors leave you most open to shift into good color pairs are not necessarily the highest performing ones. And we'll start with by win rate. By win rate so far, looking at the 2 color groups and taking, let's say for white, I would take the wins of all the whites here divided by the games of all the whites. That gives us, for blue, you get a 58.76% win rate. That's the highest. For red, it's a 58.1% win rate. For white, it's a 57.95% win rate. So right under red there.
Pretty much the same.
Green has a little bit of a jump down with 56.33%, and black has a lot more of a jump down at 54.63. So with that, it's kind of blue, then red and white, then green, then black. By win rate. What do you think about that?
Like I said, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised because I think black is going to take figuring out for people. I do think black can be a powerhouse color. I haven't, again, so my current deck that I'm playing is red black. I'm only 1 game into it, so I can't speak with a lot of authority here. But from what I've seen, and from what I've seen played against me, people are making play mistakes. People are making significant play mistakes. And that might be just because I'm currently in gold, right? And obviously that as you go up, the mistakes get less and less. But I'll notice my opponent doing something, and I'm like, that makes absolutely zero sense, right? Like, or there's a better way to do that and accomplish what my opponent is trying to accomplish. And I think Descend is kind of throwing people, because normally you don't really want to throw permanents away into your graveyard. You're trying to avoid that. And so, I've seen opponents like hit their Descend threshold and then use the card that returns 2 to your hand, and then like lose their Descend threshold. And it's like, all right, well, if you'd kept your Descend threshold, I'd probably be dead right now. But like, you instead went below it, and now you can't do a number of things that you wanted to do. And again, so I think there's just things that people have yet to learn, right, about black, and I think black will come up. And I think some of the other colors will go down. I'm somewhat surprised green is so low. I do think green is pretty powerful, particularly green-red dinos is pretty powerful. I think green-white Explore is not as powerful, but it can be pretty good. And then, like the other archetypes, green-blue, I think green-blue Explorer is pretty bad. I think green-white is actually a little bit better because you can get some artifact synergies going. So yeah, I'm kind of surprised where green is at, but I don't disagree with any of the top 3 in terms of win rates. I think red is very powerful, blue is very powerful, white is very powerful, and honestly, it's kind of a toss-up for me which of the 3 is the best at any given time, because I think they all do their own things very well. I tend to think red, just if only because a Braid is such a very powerful card in this set, and draft 5 copies of a Braid if your pod will let you. It's so good. It deals with most of the creatures in the set and any artifact. And so that's like 80% of the set there. So yeah. It is basically removal for 2 mana if you don't like something. So that's honestly one of the reasons I think red is so far up there. I'd be interested to see the game in hand win rate on a Braid. I haven't looked it up, but I'd bet it's at least like close to 60%. 58.1. Okay. So it's 58.1.
Yeah. Yep.
So that's pretty high. I'm surprised. I'm actually somewhat not surprised that Goblin Tomb Raider's at top, because that's the goblin that I was talking about in like people playing that in mono red and just getting 2/2 hasters for 1. Itali's Favor also up there. Itali's Favor 58.6. So people are sleeping on that one.
Yeah. So a few things about what you said.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on the colors?
Do I think that black will go up over time? Yes. Do I think it's going to dethrone at any point any of the other colors? No, I do think black is the worst. I do think Descend is the worst mechanic. It in a set where you want a lot of things on the battlefield, black is the anti-thing. And I don't think you want to be descending a whole lot because you do lose that resource. It's just, you need some type of resource advantage. And when you're playing black, I think the real way to get there is with pairing it with blue. That's why I think like blue is the best thing to pair black with, because I like the card draw that you get out of blue. I like the other resources you get out of blue. I like the way to stall the game a little bit with blue. Even though blue can go fast, it can also stall out the game. So like, other than with blue, I have a hard time pairing black with anything. Maybe I just haven't cracked the whole case. Maybe there's some micro synergies I haven't figured out with black, but I do think the Descend mechanic is the worst, enough that I don't see black coming up to 4th place over any other color. But we'll see. The metagames do shift and colors do shift, and absolutely. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But that's just my prediction feeling so far. The rest, like the blue, red, and white, I agree that those are pretty close to interchangeable. Green, I do like a lot as well, specifically for the reasons you mentioned. I love green red. I like green white quite a bit too. In particular, I'm looking for trample effects with those colors. So maybe in our greater garbage, this will give a little bit of a sneak peek into some cards that will come up as great. But yeah, that's basically how I feel about it. Now, I do change up that order when I'm drafting, though, because I do think some colors leave you slightly more open than other colors. And you've kind of been alluding to this with your love of red. While red is, we said was the second most powerful color, and the gap is decent there between blue to the other two, red and white. Red still seems to be the best to pair with everything because it pairs well with everything except red black. So specifically, red is
which is funny because that's what I just drafted. So we're gonna see how well it goes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying never draft red black, right? If those are the colors coming your way, you should do it. And I guess that's separate from the last couple of sets where I've advocated towards like avoid green, or the last set was avoid blue and Wilds of Eldraine, and then avoid green in Lord of the Rings. But I don't think you're going to want to be completely like hard avoiding black. If it's coming your way, draft it. But I do think you do want to lean away from it and soft avoid it. So yeah, red, black, every other color pairs above 56% in red, except for red black. The next color.
So what you're really saying is this: my current draft is going to destroy my win rate.
It might.
I want to know. We'll see. We'll see.
Yeah. The next one would be white, actually, above blue, because white pairs with everything except for white black, is above 56% win rate. Blue is quite good as well. However, blue black is the one that is the lowest, along with blue green is the other one that's lower than 56%. So because of that, red and white leave you a little more open to all three of the four possible color pairs, whereas blue, you really want to be going towards two of the four color pairs. And then after red, then white, then blue is your green and black. Although
I would say, it's interesting because that I think that applies to maybe the first two or three picks, but then once you see what's open, right, you got to be ready to pivot, because if red's not open, and it frequently is not, you got to be ready to sort of move away and say, okay, I'm not going to do it. Or if a certain archetype in that color is not open, you can move to a different archetype in that color.
It's basically 100% agree. This is like if you're drafting with preferences and you have an equal pick of two colors, go towards the one, the higher ranked color here in terms of pick order. But obviously, strength of card matters more. Your particular draft situation of the seat you're in matters way more than these draft color picks, right? So agreed. So what do you want to go into?
Well, I want to say, in addition to like color preference, picking the cards that work in multiple archetypes in those colors, right? So like 100%. I'm thinking particularly like I'm happy to take Itali's Favor if I see it in a pack one, pick one, right? Or a Braid, pack one, pick one. Like even if there's a decent red rare in the pack, or even a really good red rare in the pack, if it's like very contingent, if it's a red rare that only works with Descend, right? And I'm like, well, I don't know that I'm going to want to do red Descend, so why in the world would I take that? I'd rather take a Braid over it, because I'm like, I know a Braid will be good in any situation in which I play it. I know Itali's Favor will be a good card in any situation in which I play it. So I think that's the caveat that I'd add on to that is, take the card in the color that you think can work in multiple situations, right? I can use an example from my recent draft. I pack one, picked one, and I'm not sure this was the best pick because there wasn't a Braid in the pack, but it was a black card. It's a rare. I forget the name of it, but it costs 3. It's a 2/4. Whenever you attack with it, if you're the player with the highest life, you create a 1/1, or no, if you're attacking the opponent with the highest life, you create a 1/1 life linker, and then if you have the highest life, you draw a card and lose a life. And I was like, that is good no matter what. It's a 2/4 for 3, and it will. I can attack with it probably, and I don't care if I'm descending. I don't need to descend. That will be good, and I took that. So,
right, it's Preacher of the Schism. I've played it as well.
Yeah. Okay. There you go then. So yeah, that to me is like, that was to me. I didn't know if I was going to go black or not, but I was like, hey, that keeps my options open. I could go black white with this. There's a lot of options because the creature it creates is a white life linker. I could go black red. I could go black blue. This does a lot of things in a lot of different colors and a lot of options. So that's why I ended up taking it pack 1, pick 1. But again, there wasn't a braid. I probably should have taken the braid, but but anyways, yeah, that's kind of my thought on taking the cards that work in any archetype.
I guess this kind of works for all the different colors, but like, again, this set, you do really need to have a resource advantage of some sort. And in black, a lot of that resource advantage, I do think, is this Primordial Gnar, the 5 mana 5/2 that when it dies, discover 3. That's kept pace with a lot of opponents that I've played against with having that creature as well. So do we want to move into our greater garbage segment? This segment's completely stolen from Lords Limited, but they've acknowledged that other podcasters could totally steal the rectangle theory and all that. They're like, it's yours to use it. And I think this game is pretty generic. So the whole idea is we will bring up some cards and we'll discuss whether it's great or garbage, in our opinion. Obviously, a lot of cards will be in the middle somewhere, but we can definitely note that in the commentary for everybody to learn and understand when it's good, when it's not. But at the end of the day, you got to pick, is this card great or is this card garbage? And there's no in between in your vote. So I'll start with the first one here. Compass Gnome. So it's for 2 colorless. You get a 2/1 artifact creature gnome. When Compass Gnome enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card or cave card, reveal it, then shuffle and put that card on top. So this card, I mean, a 2/1 for 2 is understated. I think this card can easily be misplayed, right? Like, you have to make the decision. Do you want to get a basic land card? And there's even the additional fact you could get a cave, right? Like, that might be worth doing even late in the game if you want to ensure that you get a permanent up next, because those caves can do the discover for you. I don't think the win rate on this is extremely high, but I'm gonna still call this great. Don't get me wrong. It's not something I'd have like a top pick, but I like to have a Compass Gnome in most of my decks when I can get it at a fairly reasonable pick, like not over something else that's really good. So I'm going to go great on this. What do you think about this, Matt?
I'm going to go against the grain, and I'm going to go with garbage. And the reason I'm going to go with garbage on it is because I think there are significantly better 2-drops, and I would pick almost like in any color. There's a 2/2 for 2 that does something, like it creates treasure token, or it explores or something like that, and I'd take that over this card's ability. If it put it in your hand, if it allowed you to get a land to hand, I think it would actually be better, even despite the explore and things like that. But I think that would make it much more playable. But I'm thinking, like, if I'm thinking of like a 2/1 artifact that I really like, I like Dig Site Conservator, right? 2/1 for 2. I mean, I'd take that hands down over this any day. Dig Site Conservator is a fantastic card.
So that one's also on greater garbage. So
we'll just. Oh, is it okay? Well, then we'll get to it. We'll get to it. We don't need to go over it now, or we can do it now if you want.
We'll jump right over to it. Yeah. So
yeah,
Compass Gnome, I agree. Like, ultimately, Compass Gnome, I think, is like a C-, but I'm still going to go towards great. I do like to have one in a lot of my decks, and it can be a fairly early pick because you're not committing to a particular color, and it helps protect you if you ever did want to splash. it kind of does a Swiss Army knife of all of it. I agree with everything you were saying. Otherwise, that it's not a great 2-drop, but it's a flexible one that I'm not scared to pick, and I definitely do like having in a lot of my decks. That's all.
Yeah.
That said,
Yeah.
Dig Site Conservator, I'll let you go read this one.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think this one is great, right? This is like the opposite for me. This is fantastic in almost any deck. It's great if your opponent has things in graveyard that you want to get rid of. It's also great, and I'm playing one in my black-red right now. Like to be able to sacrifice it and then pay for and get the discover. Because then it's like you're descending, but you're getting something for it. So that that in and of itself makes it really good. You still don't want to do it on your opponent's turn necessarily, because you want to get the descend at the end on your end step if you have things that care about it. But like it's so flexible, and the fact that you can exile 4 cards for that basically can destroy an opponent's descend deck if you need it, right? That's not going to all come up every game, obviously, but it will come up if you're playing against people who are playing black. And the fact that you can, you can't do that you can only activate that as a sorcery. That's kind of a little bit of a downside, right? Like if your opponent is doing something on their turn that cares about graveyard, you have to, or they can do something in response, like to pull a card back to hand that you're going to exile. So there's a number of things that are not that like the best, but I think it has a ton of flexibility, and so for me, it's great.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is great, and it's definitely even greater than Compass Dome for sure. The only thing I might mention is I don't care that much about the sacrifice ability. It's a definitely nice bonus, but
oh no, yeah, that's not going to come up most games.
Yeah, I prefer to more use this as like a blocker on the opponent's turn, and the discover ability says whenever it dies, it doesn't have to do the sacrifice thing.
Correct.
First.
Yes, you do not need to sacrifice it. Yes.
Yeah, I a lot of times will wait till I have a good opportunity to leave up 4 mana, and then we'll block, kill something with this, and then get a discover 4 on top of it. 2 for 1, good card.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, you can do it with that. You can do it with the descend mechanic. I think it does play pretty well in a descend deck, because even if you're not going to block with it, you'll probably trigger any number of other things that rely on descend, and so and potentially, if you're doing it on your turn, get the opportunity to discover 4, right? So yeah, I think it's an excellent card overall.
Up next, we have Dauntless Dismantler. For 1 white, you get a 1/4 human artificer creature. Artifacts your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. You can pay XX white, sacrifice it, destroy each artifact with mana value X. So the very first game I played with this card, I didn't necessarily love it, but later on, when really that ability of the artifacts your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped is big game. So I already liked that it's a 1/4 for 2. I mean, I like my 2-drops typically have 2 power, but the 4 butt on this guy is big for a 2-drop.
Yeah.
And that artifacts ability on top of that, the stat line is great. The destroy each artifact mana value X is definitely a good out for removing a big artifact on your opponent's side that you need to remove. I haven't actually seen that used against me, nor have I used it myself yet, but it's a good out. But it's the other pieces I think make this a great card. I think this is a great card.
What do you think? I actually haven't played with it yet, so I can't. I'm not sure I can effectively give it a good or great. I will lean towards great for all the reasons that you said. I mean, it is effectively blind obedience on a creature, right? Although, it doesn't also affect creatures and artifacts, but there's so many artifact creatures in this set that it's more or less similar to blind obedience. Now, it doesn't have the extort ability that blind obedience has, which is an excellent ability. But in and of itself, right, it also has the ability to blow up a board, right? Like you can pay 1 white and blow up all the treasure tokens on the board if your opponent's got a lot of them. If your opponent has Cogwork Wrestlers or other, 1-costing artifacts, and you basically pay 3 mana to blow up all of those, there's a lot of good uses for it, right? And the one thing I would say that to me kind of is a drawback is white tends to also have a lot of those types of things, right? You get a lot of 1/1 gnome tokens and things like that, and so you're not necessarily gonna want to pop this off to destroy all of your own stuff as well. And so I think that for me is the thing that potentially keeps it from true greatness. But I think overall, I tend to lean towards great with this. Again, I haven't played with it yet, so I don't actually know how much I like it. But I think it works, particularly in this set. The XX in white can get a little bit much, right? It basically effectively means you're not going to be able to destroy anything over mana value 3, because that in and of itself will cost 7. So the fact that I think that also kind of holds it back a little bit. It's mainly going to be used to deal with tokens, right? And if you've also got a lot of tokens, it's not as good. So that's my thought on it. I'll lean towards great, but I don't know yet.
What this really hurts is anyone trying to pop off with treasure tokens. They all enter the battlefield tab.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, treasure tokens all enter tab. Or somebody trying to pop off with the Envoy of Okaneka Cow, right? And create the 1/1s. This could be used against that. It can be used against anybody that's going to be using a lot of tokens. Anybody that's going to create a lot of map tokens, even. So there's a lot of uses for it, but white also uses those a lot. So I that's my worry with it, is that it can hurt you.
Up next, we have Guardian of the Great Door. For white, you get a 4/4 angel creature. As an additional cost to cast it, you have to tap 4 untapped artifact creatures and or lands you control, and it has flying. So this is interesting. I guess this is a little bit lower than I came into this card for the set, but I'm still going to call it great. In a engine where you get enough things out quickly, this becomes, probably still like a 5-drop a lot of the time, but it's a 5-drop that leaves you with a lot of mana to double spell on the same turn, and that's really what I think the advantage is here. I loved it in my blue-white Flyers deck that trophied my very first draft. That's actually the only time I've played it myself, but it seemed pretty powerful there, so I'm going great for that. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, this is another one I haven't played with yet, but my inclination is great, and I've seen it played. So a 4/4 flyer is always a good card. I mean, again, unless it costs like 7, it's generally a pretty good card. A 4/4 flyer for 2 is a great card, as long as you have things you can tap to get there. Right now, a 4/4 flyer for 6 is not bad, right? If you just have to tap 6 lands to play this, that's not necessarily bad. That's about at rate for a flyer, right? It's maybe a little bit below. You might expect a 5/5 flyer for 6, but like it's still not a terrible card. So at worst, it's a 6-cost 4/4 flyer. At best, like you're saying, it's a turn 5 drop where you've got a couple of creatures out and you maybe only have to tap 2 or 3 lands to get this there. In which case it's excellent, right? It's particularly excellent with some of the white cards that like the 1/1 flying vigilance for 1, right? Because then you can attack with it and still tap it to play this on your post-combat main phase. So I'm going to lean towards great, but I haven't played it yet. So next up, we have Glorifier of Suffering. For 2 colorless and 1, you get a 3/2 vampire soldier. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each of 2 target creature, up to 2 target creatures. And so I'm going to go with great. But again, I think it depends. It's one of those things. Again, you got to be in the right, archetype for it. This is a white-black card. This is not so much a white-red card. You could potentially play it in white-red. It's not necessarily going to be as good, right? Because you're generally wanting to get a descend off of the thing you're sacrificing. But the fact that you can sacrifice a 1/1 token or a like a map token or a treasure token or something along those lines to get 2+1/+1 counters is still pretty good, and it's a 3/2 for 3, so it's a little bit below rate. But other than that, yeah, I think it's good.
Yeah, so funny thing is, the other archetype you didn't mention is where I see this mostly is white-green for the +1/+1 counters and getting it on things like Explorer's Cache, that when the creature dies, it goes on the cache, you can redistribute that +1/+1 counter.
Yes,
Or
yeah,
any
no, it
kind of
fits
like
in that too.
power greater than base. So it fits all that. That said, I've played with this card, and I'm going to call it garbage. I don't like sacrificing something else to give +1/+1 counters. It felt like too much of a too much payment to make in order to get the +1/+1 counters. Don't get me wrong, I'm still going to play this card. Like, I'll find opportunities to play it. I don't think that a lot of these cards are in the middle. That's the tough part of greater garbage, right? But if I had to lean towards something, I'm leaning more towards garbage now than I did going into the set.
That's fair. That's fair. But think about it. Would you play a card that was 1 mana, put 2 counters on things? Because that's what you get if you sacrifice a treasure token to it, right?
Yeah, but then you have to have a treasure token out and around, and that's only going to happen in red-white, really. And the places where you play it, you have a hard time wanting to sacrifice something. Now, white-black might be an exception. I have not played white-black yet. White-black is one of the least performing color pairs, though. But I think that is one that people haven't figured out yet. The sacrifice strategy is probably a hard one to get right here. So, yeah, I don't know. I haven't ever wanted to sacrifice anything with it. I shouldn't say ever. I have before, and there have been times where I have sacrificed something just to get the 1/1, and only creature I had out was it. So I just wanted to make it a 4/3 to sacrifice something, and that didn't feel good enough for it. So you also have to have creatures out on the battlefield, which isn't always the case when you're trading off. Yeah. So
sure. Yeah.
Up next, we have Ancestral Reminiscence. For 3 and a blue, you get a sorcery, draw 3 cards, then discard a card. I do think this game is a lot about attrition, and draw 3 cards, discard a card, especially we can discard one of the lands you don't want or whatever you don't want. That's played out pretty well for me with blue. It's given me the edge over my opponents. I call this card great. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I'll lean towards great as well. I will say it's definitely great in blue-black, where you care about putting things in graveyard. So in this case, it basically gives you a descend for your turn, because you can choose whatever you don't want, put it in the graveyard, and get your descend. The thing I think is good about it that not everybody thinks about, or at least I didn't even think about this when I first did it, you don't have to discard one of the 3 cards you drew. You can discard, it's not draw 3, pick 2, discard 1. It's draw 3, discard 1. So you can decide to throw away absolute trash in your hand that you don't want, or like you said, the extra land that you don't care about late game. And so I think that's why this card for me gets into the great. If it was just draw 3, pick 2, like put 2 in your hand, put 1 in graveyard, that would be pretty bad. But the fact that you get that choice to throw away something you just do not care about is what allows it to be great. And like you said, these long attrition games, you need some kind of card draw, and this fits that bill pretty nicely, especially at common. So next up, we have Shipwreck Sentry. For 1 colorless and 1 blue, you get a 3/3 human pirate with Defender. And as long as an artifact entered the battlefield under your control this turn, Shipwreck Sentry can attack as though it didn't have Defender. So I'm going to call this, and maybe this is a little bit of a hot take here, I'm going to call this garbage. And the reason I think it's garbage is because while there are a lot of artifacts in blue, and then it's probably the most common pairing that you would do with this because it's a pirate is red, there are a lot of artifacts, so you will frequently have artifacts entering the battlefield. I just don't think it does enough. There's a lot of good cards in red and red-blue, and I would rather pick, I can name a number of cards that I'd rather pick over this at the 2-drop slot. And while I wouldn't necessarily be mad to have this in a deck in those circumstances, or even like a blue-white artifact craft, you could find a slot maybe for it. But there are so many good drops that I would rather spend 2 mana on than this. Sure, it's a fine blocker, but yeah, I mean that's basically my point. Is like there's a lot of things I'd prioritize over it. What do you think, though?
I actually agree with your hot take. I also call this garbage, and there are a lot of people saying like, "Oh, this is probably a key player into the Pirates aggro deck." I agree. You don't want to be playing this card. You want to be playing something else that benefits more from artifacts coming into play, or artifacts coming into play. Like I'd like this a lot more if it was the exact same card and it was like an artifact human pirate, or like the fact that it doesn't feel the artifact synergy itself. Makes it not good enough to me. So I'm not saying it's unplayable, but I did play like two copies, I want to say, in my Pirates deck, and it was fine, but I wish I didn't have these cards in my deck. I wanted other ones. So I'm now drafting these lower and kind of putting them in as filler in my Pirates deck.
It's certainly not a bad filler card. Right? If you're looking for that 23rd card and you're like, okay, well, I've got a Shipwreck Sentry, sure, that's fine. But when drafting, this would be a very low take for me.
Up next, we have Braided Net. For 2 and a blue, you get an artifact. When it enters a battlefield, or it does so with 3 net counters on it, tap it to remove a net counter from Braided Net. Then you tap target non-land permanent. Its activated abilities can't be activated for as long as it remains tapped, and craft with artifact 1 and a blue. When you craft it, you get a artifact with 3 and a blue, tap it, draw a card for each artifact you control, then put Braided Kupu, this card, into its owner's library, 3rd from the top. Now, I think this might be one of like the 2 rares I put into this greater garbage, but I do think this is one of those cards that will get, some people call it great, some people call it garbage, and that's kind of what I targeted with this set of cards. I like this card a good amount. I'm going to call it great. I don't think it is great, but basically it's this thing taps down something for quite a while, and then it can eventually draw cards. I like that quite a bit, and it's an artifact itself, fueling the artifact synergies. So yeah, it's a great for me. What do you think?
I haven't used it yet, so caveat there. But I think like my hunch is it's garbage, and my hunch is it's garbage because I think it's just. Well, yes, you can. It effectively is like take target creature you don't like and put 3 stun counters on, right? But there are other cards that do that in blue that are not rare. And as far as the transform, right, you're effectively spending, 6 mana to draw a number of cards, right? Depending on how many artifacts you have, it'll probably be like 3 or 4, somewhere in that range, which isn't necessarily bad. But it's, again, I think it's really slow. And I think because it's slow, it doesn't play to the strengths of blue in this as much. Like, blue-red is an aggro deck. And this is kind of the deck you'd play it in. That's the kind of the deck you'd play it in. I probably wouldn't play this in like blue-green or blue-black, or maybe in blue-white because you care about artifact craft. But yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's too slow. And I think there are other cards in blue that do the same things, like Ancestral Reminiscence draws 3 cards, for 4 mana, just kind of like this might. And then, there are other cards that tap things and put stun counters on them in blue, which is effectively what this does. I mean, it does have the additional thing of its activated abilities, so that could, that could help, right? But a lot of times they'll just use an activate. If you tap an artifact with this, they'll just use it in response if it has an activated ability and things like that. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure it gets you a lot for it, but yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, and the decent points. That's a little bit overcosted for the stuff, but I guess the thing is, for 1 card, you do get all those things, right? So like for this ability, you might want to normally pay 2 rather than 3, perhaps. Maybe like, it's slightly overcosted, but that does really help your tempo play for pirates, for example, of tapping something down to get on in, or slowing down your opponent for a while if you need to, and then eventually getting to draw the cards all out of 1 card's worth of value, So it does a lot for 1 card's worth of value. That's why I get the great there. But I do hear all your points that it's inefficient on both sides. But when you tack both of those opportunities onto 1 piece of cardboard, you get a lot out of your 1 piece.
That's fair. Yeah. And the fact that it comes back, right, you'll get it back again and get to play it a second time if your opponent doesn't destroy it, right? Like, yeah. I haven't played with it, but that's just my hunch on it. But maybe I'll draft it and think it's great.
I have played with it, and I did like it.
That's fair. So next up, we have Diamond Pickaxe. Costs 1 red. For that, you get an artifact equipment. It's indestructible, and when you equip it for 2 colorless, equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has, whenever this creature attacks, create a treasure token. So this is more or less a short sword with upside. And I haven't played with it, but I have seen it played against me, and it's pretty good. The fact that you just get treasure tokens every time. It's certainly an Easter egg for Minecraft, where the diamond pickaxe is kind of the ultimate thing. So that's fun too, but that's more flavor. But it's a good card. I think it's a good card. If you've got something that you're reliably wanting to attack with every turn, this will do it. As long as you're not afraid of that thing dying, because it would be a pain in the ass to have to pay the 2 to re-equip it. But it's an artifact, right? And you can tap it while it's equipped to something. So if you're playing red-white and you want to, you've got that artifact tap meta going, you can tap this to put to contribute to the counters on the adaptive gem guard, for example, right? So that's just a sheer bonus on top of it. So for me, it's great.
Yeah, I also have this as great. I've played it in all my red decks because people are passing up on this. I think a lot of people think this is garbage, and it does play out quite well. Even the equip 2 is a high cost, but when you're doing that, you're going to want to be attacking with your creature you're equipping it on, and then you create the treasure token right there to replace 1 of those mana to begin with. So this is a repeatable source of artifacts and can really ramp away with the game as well. And it also is a boost to give +1/+1 on a creature. It does a lot for the 1 mana and then the equipping for the 2 even.
Yep. And thinking about it again with the synergies, right? You put this on a Miner's Guidewing, right? A 1/1 flying vigilance, right? If your opponent doesn't have flyers, you're going to attack with that every turn, and it's just sheer upside from there. And so those are the kinds of things I would like to attach this to, is those kind of things where your opponent might not have a blocker that can deal with it, and then even if it doesn't do a lot of damage, you're getting a treasure token. That treasure token can be tapped for artifact tap mechanics. Then you get 2 the next turn, and then 3, and then you just kind of ramp, like you said, from there. So it's excellent.
Up next, we have Staggering Size. For 1 green, you get an instant. With target creature gets +3/+3 and gains trample until end of turn. This is the one I was alluding to earlier. You want trample on your green stuff. This card is great, especially in the set that has a lot of high-powered creatures, and that's your way to get over all your lots of small things that also exist in this set. So I think this card is great. It's a high pick. What do you think, Matt?
Agreed. The only thing I'd add to that is there's also a lot of death touch in this set, and that's where this card really shines. Like, you can have an 8/8 creature. If your opponent has a 1/1 death touch, you don't want to do anything with that 8/8 creature. And I've stalled so many board states against a 11/11 adaptive gem guard, or the Thousand Moons Smithy that they're creating, like an artifact creature that has power toughness equal to the number of artifacts, and they've got 12 artifacts on the board. But as long as I've got a 1/1 death toucher, no one wants to attack into that. And so this solves that problem. And you don't care at that point if it dies, because you're going to still get a ton of damage in. And so that's why I think that's the other reason I'd add that this card is great. Next up, we have Huatli's Final Strike for 2 colorless and 1 green. It's an instant, and target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. It deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls. So this is your classic bite spell at instant speed. I'll say I think it's great. I think this is exactly what you want to be doing with green, particularly with dinos, which tend to be greater power than toughness in a lot of cases. So you have an opportunity to take out a lot of the board. There's a lot of 4X dinos in various configurations, and this makes that hit for 5, and that'll take out about 90% of the creatures in the set. So this is, effectively a 3-mana instant destroy target creature in a lot of cases. And that's always good, right? So I'll say I like it.
I'm going to disagree on this one and go garbage. It's not because I don't like the card. It's decent. I find that for 3 mana, I want to be either instead for my cardboard, getting a permanent on board where I can add to the board, or if I want to get through in green, I want to do it with some kind of trample pumping effect. There's a lot of those. So there's, yes, the one we just looked at with staggering size. A lot of times you'll be doing this in like a green-red deck where you get there's the +2/+2 in trample and destroy an artifact when it deals damage to the opponent. Those type of spells are what I'm looking at over this. So it's more, I found myself, yes, I draft this to attempt to play it, and sometimes I cut it in favor of getting enough permanents in. And again, this set, I think you do typically play more permanents than most sets. And then the tricks that I have or removal that I have is either cheaper removal or is a trample effect instead. So I end up cutting this a lot of the time. That's the only reason I give this garbage.
That's fair. I'll say there are good situations for it, particularly if you're in like green-white or green-blue that doesn't have a lot of direct damage removal. Because you'll get situations where somebody plays Deep Cavern Bat or something like that, and then they steal something that from your hand that you really want, and then you don't have either you don't have a reach creature, or they never use it to attack, and they just kind of sit on whatever good card, and this helps with that a lot. So that's kind of the other use case that I really like it for, is it allows you to destroy something that your opponent may never attack or block with, but that does something really good for their board.
Up next, we have Jade Seedstones for 3 and a green. You get an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, distribute 3 +1/+1 counters among 1, 2, or 3 creatures you control. It has Craft with Creature for 5 green. You get a 7/7 that when it enters the battlefield, you gain life equal to the mana value of the exiled card used to craft it. I'm going with great on this. I think the +1/+1 counters does a lot with green, especially with Explorer's Cache and a lot of the synergies of higher power than base power. And just that combined with the future of getting a 7/7 gain life later on, all in one card, is quite good. What do you think, Matt?
Agreed. It's an incredibly efficient card, I think, overall. And a 7/7 for 7 and gain 4 or 5 life is a really good card on its own. It doesn't have trample, right? So it's not quite like a Hamlet Glutton or something like that, but it's not too far off, right? And especially with a number of ways to give things trample in green or green-red, you'll get there probably. And so yeah, I think it's great, and for all the reasons you said and those. Next up, we have Malamet Battleglyph. So for 1 green, you get a sorcery. Choose target creature you control and target creature you don't control. If the creature you control entered the battlefield this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on it. Then those creatures fight each other. So this is your classic fight spell. We talked about the bite spell in Huatli's Final Strike. Most sets in green have something along these lines. I'll say I think this is great. The thing that does it for me is the 1 mana cost. I think the fact that you can do this and use it early to take out a key opponent's creature, whether that's, you know, the Deep Cavern Bat or something else that's key to your opponent's strategy. This is often, you know, could be used to take out a Captain Storm before it becomes big early on in a game. So, and it's also good late. It's good, you know, later in the game when you've got a big enough creature that you can use this on, or something you want to, you know, get the +1/+1 counter on for reasons that green cares about. Greater, like you said, greater power than base power. So I think this synergizes really well with a number of green cards, and so I think it's great.
So don't get me wrong, I like this card, but I am going to go garbage. I have not really liked fight spells in this set. There's a decent amount of the death touch related stuff that you talked about earlier that this does not fight well against. And I guess like the bite spell, I just have liked getting the trample effects over this. So I found myself cutting this in favor of some of those trample based effects instead. Not bad, don't get me wrong. Draft this, you should play this a decent amount of time, but I think it's worse in this set than this kind of effect has been in other sets. That's all.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
Up next, we have Threefold Thunderhulk, which is one of our rares, among our 2 rares I think we're talking about. In this, for 7 mana, you get a 0/0 gnome artifact creature. When it enters the battlefield, put 3 +1/+1 counters on it. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, create a number of 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens equal to its power. Pay 2 and sacrifice another artifact. You can put a +1/+1 counter on Threefold Thunderhulk. I have played with this card. It did run away with the game. I made a ton of 1/1s that just swarmed the opponent. So it came down and it became a 7 mana win the game next turn type of effect. So we debated this one a bit in our grading prior to the set. I just wanted to basically call out that this played like a B+, I want to say. It was pretty high. Maybe that was the game situations that I was in, but it won me 2 games that I wasn't sure I would win otherwise. I don't think you've had a chance to play with it, so I'm not sure.
I've not had a chance to play with it, but I can see how it would be incredibly good, right? I'll say great just because on paper it looks great, and I think there are a number of situations. However, I will say great, but to me, while it's probably great in a lot of situations, the real this is a white card. Play this in your white artifact, whether it's white red artifact or white blue artifact craft. That's where this is going to shine the most, right? Now, is it bad in any other deck? Maybe, probably not. But I could really see this fitting into that like white X, artifact archetype, because it gives you a lot more power for that, and you have other things you can sacrifice, whether they're map tokens or treasure tokens or whatever. It gives you that option. Now obviously it comes with its own tokens as well, so you can sacrifice those, but in an ideal world,
I've been fine sacrificing the tokens and just replacing them. Like that's what I did.
The very next turn, it's not bad on its own, but
yeah. And then I was tempted, I almost wanted to hold up my staggering size for this because it would create 3 more tokens on top of it, like any of your pump spells. I end up needing my staggering size before I end up playing this. But I think it also goes well in green decks that can get counters on things and pump as well. But really, almost any deck. I see where you're coming at, where you can get more sacrificed artifacts to pump this up even more. But it's been able to do it. I put this down, create the 3, next turn sacrifice all 3, have a 6/6 attack, get 6 tokens, and that's where I've run away with the game. At that point, I can do that every turn, or because
the thing is, your opponent can't have something bigger, right? If your opponent has something bigger, then this is not as good, right? That's really where it comes down to. Now, a 6/6 is pretty big. There's not a lot of things in the set that are bigger, but you could have someone with an adaptive gem guard that's like a 22/22 or some stupid stuff like that, right? In which case, this is not particularly as good, but it is good to create blockers, right? To block that 22/22. So there are, I think there are limits to it, but I would tend to go great.
Yeah, agreed. There's limits. I will say when they do have something bigger, you still get 6/1/1s, which might be enough to swarm to finish off the game. You know, there. So in those situations, it does depend on board state, though. So that's why I didn't go all the way to like the A- range. I don't think it's quite a bomb. It's just a good card.
Yeah. So next up, we have Tinker's Tote. For 2 colorless and 1 white, you get an artifact that when it enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens. And you can also pay 1 white and sacrifice it to gain 3 life. I think this is great. I've seen it played in a lot of the white artifact decks, whether it's white-red or white-blue. It gives you a lot of rectangles. And then you have that additional option later on if you're in need of a little bit of life to sacrifice it and gain that life. 3 to create 2 1/1s is not necessarily great, but you got to think about it itself as a rectangle that you can use to tap for artifact purposes or craft with later, or the 1/1s you can craft with. So it gives you a lot of flexibility in one card. So that's why I think it's great.
I agree. Great for all the reasons you mentioned. Nothing to add. Up next, we have Tendril of the Micro Tyrant. For 1 green, you get a 2/2 fungus wizard creature. You can pay 5 green to put 7 +1/+1 counters on target non-creature land you control. It becomes a 0/0 fungus creature with haste. It's still land. And I'm going with great on this because as a 2/2 for 2, it's fine, and that's a lot of times what it is. But when you draw it late, I've even had it where I play on turn 2 and they, don't want to respond to it because it doesn't do anything else until turn 7 plus or whatever. But because they didn't do anything to it, I did get there, and I was able to make 7/7 hasty creatures at that point. So I guess my point is this is a threat they will eventually have to deal with, and it's fine on turn 2 to begin with. And as that, it falls in the great camp to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. For all the reasons you said, I would note this is one of those cases, right, where I like, the fight and the bite spells, right? Like if you're playing against this and you're in green, you need a way to deal with these things that your opponent is never going to attack with this. They're rarely going to block with it unless they absolutely have to. And like that's your way to get rid of it. I mean, if you're in green red, take a braid obviously over those, but like if you're in a green other color, like that's your removal to potentially get rid of this. Although you can pacify, there's other ways to deal with it, but not pacify, petrify, right, in this set, which obviates its ability. But yeah, it's a great card. All right, so our last one to go up for greater garbage is Rampaging Ceratops. It costs 4 colorless, 1 red. For that, you get a 5/4 dinosaur, and it can't be blocked except by 3 or more creatures. I have not yet played with this creature, but it is very similar to me to the troll in Lord of the Rings, which was, I believe, a 6/4 for 6, I want to say, or maybe it was also 5. But it had that same ability, which I will call Mega Menace, which trademarked. But I'm going to go with great because that card. Obviously the troll also had the swamp cycling ability for 1, which was really nice. But it was just a good beefy thing on the board that was really hard for your opponent to stop unless they wanted to sacrifice multiple things to it. So or at least trade like 3 for 1. And so I'm going to go with great. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to go garbage on this one. Not that. So I have played it, and it was fine. If you need a dinosaur at 5, it's not a bad one. I just found that I'm able to get other bigger dinosaurs that I want for 5 or more and be okay with it. And the 5/4 was just a little bit understated, even though it has Mega Menace. I love the Mega Menace phrase. Like I'll play it. It's okay, but it wasn't as good as I thought. There were a lot of times where my opponent would have 3 creatures that could deal with it, and that was enough to hold me off for a turn when I really needed it not to hold me off. I would rather my creatures be a bit bigger and have trample, and those do exist in the set. So
Yes,
I
yeah.
found it replaceable.
That's fair. I would have thought you would have liked it because while it doesn't have trample, it effectively is very difficult to block. And so in a lot of ways, it does almost have trample because it has a pretty significant form of evasion, right? And hey, you can staggering size it after they block with 3 creatures and just, absolutely destroy your entire opponent's board. So
don't get me wrong, this game is not like love it or hate it, right? So this is like in the middle for me, but I'm leaning more towards the garbage because there are other things I end up wanting to play over this a lot of the time, and that's a lot of my reasoning for a lot of these cards, right? So yeah, this isn't a horrible card. It's just it wasn't as good as I thought it would be. I thought this would be maybe one of your premium 5-drops, and it wasn't.
Sure. Yeah. No, there are definitely other good 5-drops in green and red that are dinos that, Panicked Altasaur is great. 4/5 reach that you can tap and deal 2 damage to your opponent's head. That's certainly better than this. But it's still very, I would probably play it. But yeah, I see why you're going with garbage. So thanks for joining us for our first deep dive, shall we say, into Lost Caverns of Ixalan. It's been out 3 or 4 days now. We both had a few games and matches under our belt, and we really enjoyed them. Next time, I think we're probably going to dive into a few drafts, maybe go through, pick by pick, kind of explain some reasoning, roast the other person on what they picked or why they didn't pick that over that, as we usually do. But for now, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, and we'll see you in the next one.
See you in the next one.